Hi, Sue Cave here, co-author of Physical French Phonics. In this video, I'm going to suggest how you can incorporate Physical French Phonics into your scheme of work, whether you're working in primary or secondary. First thing to do is get familiar with the 26 key phonemes which we've identified in French, which either are a sound which doesn't exist in English, or does but has different letter strings. If you use the file on the CD in the resource book, you'll be able to practice the actions along with the native speakers and see the corresponding images. Next thing to do is have a good look at your scheme of work and make sure that the vocabulary that you have within it will allow your learners to encounter all these 26 phonemes as well as many of the graphemes as possible. There is a mapping tool in the form of an Excel spreadsheet which you can find on the Cave Languages website, and you can see the link for it there. Here is an example in the Cave Languages primary scheme of work. So I used it in year 3 first of all. You'll see on the left there are all the graphemes for the 26 key phonemes, and I went through the vocabulary and indicated in each term which of the graphemes they were going to meet. And then likewise in year 4 I carried over in red from year 3 the graphemes that they'd met in year 3, and then added the ones in green for year 4 and so on, 5 and 6, so that you see by the time in their 4th year of language learning in year 6 that all the phonemes have been encountered and nearly all of the graphemes. There are just a few though that they haven't. If you're working in secondary, I'm going to show you a video now made by Tracy Williams, who is responsible for the MFL provision across ATLP, which is a multi-academy trust in the West Midlands, which includes 5 secondary schools.
So, how did we embed physical French phonics into our schemes of learning? Fast forward a year and it was time to rewrite the Key Stage 3 schemes of learning once again. This time we were working collaboratively across the Multi-Academy Trust, and as a Maths MFL team we were keen to properly embed phonics into the new scheme of learning to make it an integral part of our MFL curriculum intent. We started by mapping out the curriculum content, and then we wanted to embed the teaching of phonics alongside the plan's content. Rather than following a rigid phonetic order, we devised our own order for introducing each of the phonemes, so that it was linked directly with the content within our scheme of learning. We systematically mapped out the introduction of the phonemes to ensure that we introduced as many as possible over the course of year 7, and to also ensure that we had an opportunity to introduce multiple graphemes for each of the different phonemes.
If you have the Physical French Phonics resource book, you may have noticed that we indicate that if you teach these 8 colours, 6 numbers, days of the week, 3 animals and months of the year, you will in fact allow your learners to encounter all the 26 key phonemes. I've created some resources in Smart Notebook form and lesson plans to allow the delivery of these key phonemes, but it's not intended that these resources be used sequentially as a scheme of work, but more as support resources. However, if you would like to have access to them, all you have to do is send me a photo at the address that you can see below and of your copy of Physical French Phonics, and I will send you the password that gives you access to them. So let's think about years 3 and 4 now, and how you can introduce the phonics to your learners. I would suggest that you slowly introduce the phonemes in the vocabulary in your scheme of work using the 7-step process. I'm going to explain this in a little bit more detail in a short while. Start off, first of all, just with the sounds in the vocabulary, and when the learners become confident, introduce the accompanying letter strings. And slowly, over the lessons, you build up their knowledge of the phonemes and accompanying graphemes. The teaching of phonics, it shouldn't be seen as something separate. It would be something that's integral to most lessons, and it will complement the other activities you're doing, as well as the development of language skills. So if we think about maybe your very first lesson in year 3, inevitably what we often teach are the greetings of hello and goodbye. So I would do this by teaching them the key sounds with the accompanying actions. So I'd say, put your finger on your nose and go, oh, and make a sign for a fast car and go, and then do the chimpanzee sound. And then do the gargling sound. And then I'd say at the start, put the sound as we make in English for the letter B, which is B, and then we blend them. B, on, j, bonjour, and then get them to say the word. And the same for goodbye. Au revoir. Au revoir. And then the children will understand what each sound is and how it's made, and then that you will get some very accurate pronunciation. So this is the 7-step process to which I referred earlier. And this is the process I would suggest you try to include in the early stages of teaching and introducing phonics. When you're going to introduce some new vocabulary, first of all, start with step 1, which is to introduce the children to the sounds in the word. Then get them to blend the sounds to create the word, just as I did with bonjour and au revoir, and then practice the meaning of the word. So when they connect it to the sound, so when they hear the sound of the word, do they know what it means? Then introduce the letters that go with those sounds in these particular words that they're learning. Practice reading and spelling them and writing them, and then eventually putting them into a sentence. So if we have a look what this might look like very early on in year 3, so we're teaching some colour adjectives, I would say, first of all, let's practice these sounds. That would be step 1. And then we would blend the sounds. So to make red, it would be rouge. Then there would be lots of activities to practice recognizing the whole sound of the word and what it means. Then I would show them the letters that make these sounds. And then I would get them to have a go at slowly spelling out the word using this little code. And this is where in French you would encounter the fact that there are lots of silent letters in French. Then there will be activities to practice recognizing the written form of the word and then putting the words into sentences. And this process would be repeated each time some new vocabulary was met. And so there would be a slow building up of the knowledge of the sounds and accompanying letter strings. In that 7-step process, step 1 and step 2 are maybe steps with which you're not normally familiar, not normally ones that which you include in your teaching process, namely introducing the sounds and blending them. And likewise the steps when you're introducing letters and practicing them. So in the Physical French Phonics resource book on pages 19 to 29, you'll see that there's lots of ideas for classroom activities to practice those, as well as the other steps in this 7-step process. So let me give you an example of what a series of 4 lessons might look like much later on, nearing the end of year 3, when they've already met quite a few phonemes and are beginning to recognize some of the graphemes that go with those phonemes. So a lesson would not just be purely phonics focused. The phonics would be within it and would be an integral part of it and would help towards the development of the language skills, developing new vocabulary, sentence building, grammatical knowledge, and songs and stories and rhymes and culture. So in this first lesson here, we're working on verbs, and we're recalling verbs that they've already met. And then before we introduce how to pronounce some new verbs, I would introduce two of the sounds which I know that they've not met before. So we'd practice the hand on the horn sound, which is on, and the shushing girl sound, sh. And then I would show them a slide like this, which has the images for all the sounds in the word for jump, walk, and dance. So that would be s, o, t, et, sauter, de, danser, marcher. All those images which are not the hand on the horn and the shushing girls are ones which they already know. So it's just a case of teaching the two new ones, and then they should be able to blend those sounds to pronounce those words. So already it's this whole 7-step process is getting faster. I might include a rhyme which has ER verbs within it as another way of reinforcing this grammatical knowledge and the sound of the verbs. And then I'm going to bring in, instead of having the imperative form, I'm going to meet for the first time how verbs change with the first and second persons. So, je and tu. I know that they've met all the sounds apart from the U sound that they're going to meet in tu. So we practice that first. And then we practice the word for I. They've already met the j and the e sound, so they should be able to blend that for je and then tu. And then we talk about how this sound on the end of the verb changes when you put je and tu in it. And then we would have a little guessing game of what is this person doing behind my back using je and tu. The third lesson would probably be the rhyme again. And then I would introduce which letters make those sounds. So now they are seeing the whole spelling. They've got the support of the images above to help them pronounce them. And if you can make out there in grey are all the silent letters. In year 3, we're working towards sentence building, so we're going to add some adverbs here to make the sentences longer, and then we'll probably play that guessing game again, and I might introduce a new song, a traditional song, which has the adverbs within them. And then the fourth lesson would be maybe singing that song again, and then a listening activity where I'm saying a sentence and they've got to recognize which person, which verb, which adverb, and the circling, and then a writing activity using a language scaffold so that they can write some sentences starting with je and tu. So over those 4 lessons, the phonics is there to enable them to take part in those activities confidently, but all the time building up their vocabulary knowledge and their grammatical knowledge. So in Key Stage 3, there are very many similar activities here. I guess the key difference will be that there is more time in Key Stage 3 to spend on lessons, more lesson time, and probably the input may be slightly faster because they are older learners. But essentially the same activities are taking place. So introducing groups of phonemes in the first lesson, maybe in the context of those numbers, colours, etc. I mentioned earlier. Making sure that phonics is in all lessons, maybe highlighting letters in a sentence builder grid or knowledge organisers. Having lot of retrieval activities, maybe as lesson starters, to ensure the systematic review of them, and continuing to provide support through the phonic images. And little by little allowing the learners to start trying to decode unfamiliar words with this knowledge, and also using the actions as a means of error correction strategy. I'm going to let Tracy explain this in a little bit more detail now in this second video.
At certain points within the scheme of learning, we included a lesson where the phonemes and corresponding graphemes were introduced with the learning objective of how do I pronounce French words properly. These lessons gave the teacher the opportunity to spend time introducing new phonemes and giving the teacher sufficient time to practice linking them with the action and the image and the corresponding grapheme in the context of the language from the scheme of learning. So, for example, very early on in Year 7, using the context of numbers, we introduced the first 8 graphemes along with the silent consonant and the silent H rules. This is clearly set out in the scheme of learning, and there is time within the scheme of learning to make sure that this is done properly. We knew for this to be successful, we needed to incorporate it into all of our lessons, not just those that were identified on the scheme of learning as being lessons to develop pronunciation. So we highlighted letters on our sentence building grids and on our knowledge organisers. We also created sets of phonic retrieval, like do now or starter style activities to ensure that our students retrieve this new knowledge systematically at the start of lessons. We also use the images as prompts within our normal lessons to remind the students how to pronounce new words. This is an example of liaison using the Z sounds and the buzzing B image. We also used explicit questioning routines, asking students things like, which sound does IN make in French? That's right, it's the sound. So on that basis, how would you pronounce this word? These things are all things that the teachers have now incorporated into their everyday questioning routines to ensure that students really have an opportunity to develop and embed their phonetic understanding. The final thing that we do within our schools is linked to error correction. The teacher and peers in the class also use the actions as part of their error correction strategy. So if students make a pronunciation mistake, the teacher or one of their friends can do the action for the sounds they have mispronounced, and the child can self-correct.
So, back in primary, by years 5 and 6, normally that would be sufficient time in the first 2 years in Key Stage 2 for all the phonemes to have been encountered, but probably not all the graphemes. But then there's still a need for constant review and practice. But I would slowly start to remove the support of the images and the actions for many of the phonemes, which I think they're confident with, and only use them where I think support is needed. And what the aim is that in Year 6, they can start to pronounce unfamiliar words and decode them with a high degree of accuracy. So if I was introducing some new vocabulary in Year 5, I would start now at step 5 in that 7-step process. So I would be showing them the whole word written down with the images above to support them with how to pronounce them. So here is the word for a caterpillar. So hopefully they would see that and be able to go une chenille, une chenille. Then we would be working on activities to recognize the written word and then swiftly moving on to putting words into sentences. In French, as soon as you start putting words into sentences, you need to start thinking about liaison. This is a way of practicing it, getting them to recognize that those silent letters are no longer silent. And also with adjectival agreement, those silent letters can get sounded when they're being followed by an E. So here is an example of some sentence starters, and then moving on to a sentence builder grid. And you see here, I've put up the words for them, but I've only given them support for some of the phonemes, which I think they might forget. And then once we've practiced those, we're putting them together with words which they already know to make this complete sentence with a sentence starter, il y a, an indefinite article, an adjective of size, a noun, and a colour. And I've taken away all the support now of the images, and all I've done as a means of support is giving the silent letters in grey, so that will remind them that they are silent. At times we might use a game like this to practice particular phonemes which are causing some problem in that they often forget how they sound. This is a 4 in a row game, 2 teams, we spin the spinner. The orange team, it's landed on this sound with all these graphemes here, E, so they have to find a word from this grid and pronounce it correctly. For example, friser has got that sound within it, so that they would get a cross over that one if it was correct, and then it would be the black team, and they're trying to get 4 adjacent rectangles with words within them, either horizontally, vertically, or diagonally. But activities like that to practice particularly more troublesome phonemes is an excellent way of going about it. And then in Year 6, often at the start of the lesson, as a quick starter activity, I might put up some words which I'm pretty sure they've never seen before, all with a particular phoneme within it. In this case, it's all with the same grapheme QU, and seeing if the children can pronounce accurately those words without any support. It's just giving them that confidence to have a go. In Key Stage 4, if you're thinking of putting this into your scheme of work, but you're going to start in Key Stage 3 and thinking, what could you do in Key Stage 4? Well, here Tracy explains how you can use Physical French Phonics for remedial work, in that you're picking out those phonemes which pupils find it difficult to remember. And also she mentions it also as a way of an error correction strategy.
You can't use the Physical French Phonics approach with your Key Stage 4 classes. I certainly use it with mine. Over the lockdown period, with Sue's permission, I used this approach in my Oak National Academy lessons. I think that having something that students can hang their learning on is really, really important for long-term retrieval. The images, the actions, and the corresponding link with the grapheme and the phoneme really, really help students to embed this understanding in their long-term memories, and it helps them to unlock the code in order to be able to pronounce French words correctly. There's no need necessarily in Key Stage 4, given how tight on time we are, to introduce all of the phonemes. You could choose the phonemes that students find the most difficult to pronounce and incorporate these systematically into your schemes of learning. The benefit of the error correction strategy is huge. It means you can intervene in a really non-threatening way and help students to develop their pronunciation.
So if you have the Physical French Phonics resource book, you may have noticed this grid, which is could be very useful for advanced learners, say in Key Stage 5, because all the images have been associated with its corresponding IPA. So this means that a student in Key Stage 5, working independently and using a bilingual dictionary, will be able to decode the phonic symbols within it. So, for example, if they see this, if they're not familiar with the IPA, they probably wouldn't mean a lot to them. But if they then can use this decoding mechanism here and know that that is the sh sound, that is the on sound, that is the sound, and that is the z sound, and you put that together and you get chanteuse, and that is how it is written phonetically, chanteuse. Likewise here, pensionnat, pensionnat, and that is what that it sounds like in French. So using this chart, it will allow learners to pronounce any word from the dictionary with a very high degree of accuracy. It's always good to provide additional support in the classroom, and these are some of the things that you can do. This is something which you can download and print from the Physical French Phonics resource book, and it could be used as a frieze on the wall. It's got the image, it's got the graphemes that go with this image, and also some keywords. I've also produced a much simpler form of the phonics frieze using the key vocabulary from those numbers, colours, etc. So this is the sort of thing that you could put on the wall once your learners are familiar with all the phonemes, or add them one by one as they encounter them. Knowledge advisors are also very popular at the moment, and not only including vocabulary, but phonics is a really good way of supporting learning in your classroom. You could provide and print off the whole phonics chart, which is in the Physical French Phonics book, and also the IPA one. Or what I do is create one for each year group. So this is the year 3 one, when they haven't met many of the graphemes, and here is the year 5 one. I'm adding to this template each year, and adding the graphemes as they are met. So in year 5 they've met a lot more graphemes, as you can see there. If I'm making a wall display in primary, if I'm putting a picture and a word, I will always put, for support, the images above the letters. My colour coding, by the way, is if it's similar to English, it's in black. If it's in red or blue, it means that the children need to think about it carefully, because it will be a sound which is different to English, and the grey letters indicate silent letters. This is something which you can download from my website. It's meant as a very simple 4-step process for seeing an unfamiliar word and thinking about how you're going to pronounce it. So the first thing is to think about silent letters. Second one is to break down any 2 vowel sounds. Third one is to think carefully about the letter E, because it can have any of those sounds. And the fourth one is looking to see if there are any vowels with an M or an N, because that will make a nasal sound. So, as a resume of all that, in primary, these are the things I would start thinking about. First of all, get familiar with all the sounds, the actions and images. Map the phonemes in your scheme of work, adjusting the vocabulary as necessary. Follow that 7-step process, particularly in years 3 and 4 when starting off. Ensure that phonics is always there as an integral part of every lesson, and as the children move into 5 and 6, slowly remove the support of the images and actions. Make sure you're constantly revisiting the phoneme grapheme connections with retrieval activities, and as they move into year 6 or even a little bit earlier, start giving them an opportunity to decode and pronounce unfamiliar words. And finally, provide that classroom support in the way I suggested. So finally, in secondary, Tracy is going to give her words of wisdom about how to think about getting started with physical French phonics.
So if I were to give some words of wisdom from a head of department who's been there, this is what I would say. Firstly, developing French pronunciation is not something which happens overnight. To see a real impact, you need to commit to embedding the phonics approach into your scheme of learning and into all of your lessons. It needs to become second nature to the teachers delivering it. It needs to move beyond individual chorusing of the phonemes and identifying the corresponding grapheme to application of this knowledge with unfamiliar words. This requires CPD to upskill your teachers. Most of them will feel massively out of their depth if you ask them to teach French phonics without this initial training. The level of success you'll see will be completely related to the consistency of your approach. Something that will really support this is time in your faculty meetings to talk about what everyone's doing and to share best practice. We have really enjoyed our journey into French physical phonics. I hope you have as much fun as we do.
So there we are. I hope that you have found that useful. If you have any queries at all, then please get in contact with me at sue@cavelanguages.co.uk. You'll also find me tweeting about phonics at SueCave4. There are quite a few other presentations and documents, some of which I've referred to today on my website, which you can see the address for there. And I've also created during lockdown some lessons for primary which demonstrate that 7-step process within it, so you might be interested in having a look at those. If you haven't got your own copy of Physical French Phonics yet, well, there's a website you can go to, and there's also a Facebook page and an Instagram page, and you can publish it from you can purchase it from Brilliant Publications, who also now have published a physical Spanish phonics version of this. So everything that really have said in this video today would apply to anyone thinking of incorporating physical Spanish phonics within their scheme of work.